Good evening. Up front tonight, a blatant disregard for the dead. That's how one funeral director describes his former place of employment.
He says he has video to prove it. 7 on Your Side's Jason Peterson joins us with a look at that video tonight, although we warn you it shows numerous bodies in bags being stored at room temperature. Jason.
That's right, Beth. After a lifetime working in Arkansas's funeral homes, Mike Jones says the last 5 months of his career spent at a Jacksonville funeral home were by far the worst.
There's 2 people
in one bag.
Mike
Jones wasn't sure anyone would believe the working conditions at Arkansas Funeral Care. So on his last day of work, he shot a video. How many people are in this room?
About here, there's maybe about 20, but there's about 26 more in the cooler that's overpopulated.
So these 20 are not
they're ready to
room temperature.
Room temperature.
I mean,
wow.
To me, that's just disrespectful for the dead, you know.
So it explains why they didn't want us to see her and they wanted a closed casket.
Danny Ray's mother died January 6th. Her funeral was delayed 10 days until Arkansas Funeral Care had been paid in full. Ray says his mother's body showed obvious signs of decomposition.
I pray to God that this don't happen to other families, that somehow, somewhere, the law can be changed to where people that's in our shoes that don't have a lot of money and get left in a situation like this don't have to go through the stuff we went through with it.
It's bad. No respect for the dead, none whatsoever. Blatant disregard for the Embalmers and Funeral Directors Board rules, state law. I mean, it's just terrible. It's a hellhole.
Now, both yesterday and today, we were told the owners at Arkansas Funeral Care had no comment. Jones has filed a formal complaint with the Arkansas State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors. His claims are now being investigated.
All right, keep us updated, Jason. Thank you.
Last week, we showed you video taken inside a Jacksonville funeral home by a former employee. Well, tonight, for the first time, the funeral home answers the charges being made against it. 7 on Your Side's Jason Peterson joins us with those replies. Jason.
Scott, to support his complaint, Mike Jones shot some video with his cell phone. A warning, we're going to briefly show you that video again before we share the response filed this afternoon by Arkansas Funeral Care. Funeral director Mike Jones says the working conditions inside Arkansas Funeral Care during his 5 months as an employee were unprofessional and disrespectful. He says this video shows close to 24 bodies being stored at room temperature, with another 24 in a nearby cooler. On Tuesday, the funeral home filed a response with the State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors. Bloodstains on walls in the prep room? Not true. The prep room is cleaned and disinfected after each embalming. Bodies stacked on top of each other outside the cooler. Not true. The deceased are treated with the utmost respect, care, and reverence. Cremated 2 bodies at once? Not true. This would be a total violation of state law, total disrespect to the families and our God whom we serve. An apprentice who does not know how to embalm? Not true. The employee in question meets all state requirements. A blatant disregard for the dead? Again, not true. Last week, another complaint was filed by a man who had to pick up a body at Arkansas Funeral Care in August of 2013. He says conditions were terrible. A body lying on the floor, bodies lying everywhere, uncleanliness due to neglect. It looked like something from a cheap horror movie. Now, in addition to the 2 complaints this year, 5 complaints were filed against the funeral home over the past 2 years. You'll hear from one of those complainants tomorrow night.
All right, Jason Peterson with the update tonight. Thank you. A former employee of Arkansas Funeral Care shot this video we first broke concerning alleged misconduct by the funeral home. A state inspector is backing up those claims, and a state board takes a step towards shutting down the funeral home.
A unanimous vote, in fact, to temporarily suspend the license of Leroy Wood and Arkansas Funeral Care made earlier today. Channel 7's Jason Peterson is outside the Jacksonville business tonight with details. Jason.
Scott, Mr. Wood will have a chance to fight for his license this Friday at 1 o'clock when the State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors gather in Little Rock for another emergency meeting. Now, until then, a lot of uncertainty for this business and for the families who still have loved ones inside. Last week, an inspector for the State Board visited Arkansas Funeral Care every day of the week, and she shared her findings with the board today. Some of those findings, she said she saw unembalmed bodies being stored at room temperature in various states of decomposition. She said she saw blood on the walls. She saw one body directly on top of another body, what appeared to be ashes in a trash can, and fluids draining from bodies. Jeff Smith is the president of the Arkansas Funeral Directors Association. He was on that conference call. He says he was disgusted by what he heard.
This doesn't represent our industry as a whole. We're outraged. I was disgusted to hear on the conference call what's happened. I don't want in any way this to reflect on the industry. We're kind, caring industry. We want to be part of our communities and help out our communities, and one bad apple does not represent who we are.
Now, we have seen several vehicles coming and going over the past several hours here, many of them family members who have loved ones inside. In one case, we saw a woman load into her vehicle what appeared to be an urn. Now, owner Leroy Wood is still here. We're expecting employees with the Pulaski County Coroner's Office to be arriving either later tonight or tomorrow to remove the remaining bodies inside this facility until that hearing is held on Friday.
Jason Peterson reporting tonight. Thanks very much.
Well, the temporary shutdown of a Jacksonville funeral home has left many Arkansas families wondering what to do. One Grant County family took action before inspection results, and disturbing video were shared with the public. 7 on Your Side's Jason Peterson joins us with their story tonight. Jason.
Beth, Becky Mays' mother lives in a Cleveland County nursing home. 2 months ago, Becky got a phone call informing her that her mother had died.
Of course, it was shock, because I had not been notified from the nursing home in Rising that she had passed.
When Ed Snow with Arkansas Funeral Care called Becky Mays to tell her that her mother's body had been transported to Jacksonville, he didn't realize he had pulled the wrong file. Owner Leroy Wood explained in a letter that it was an honest mistake. The funeral home was terribly sorry, and he would work to make sure it never happens again. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, how serious a mistake do you think this is?
Over the top. 11.
On January 8th, the Arkansas State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors reviewed the situation and ruled that it is not conduct or matters that are in violation of any rules or regulations. May's complaint was closed without a hearing. On Friday, that same board will once again be presented with concerns about Arkansas Funeral Care. Not only will questions be raised about the treatment of the deceased, but those with prepaid funeral plans are wondering what to do as well. The Arkansas Insurance Department has a prepaid benefits division that handles issues involving burial policies. And a spokesperson with the insurance department says investigators are already fielding calls and taking information from families who have prepaid policies with Arkansas Funeral Care. But they can't really offer any guidance or advice until after Friday's hearing.
More follow-ups on the way on this story, no doubt. Jason, thank you.
The owner of the Jacksonville funeral home will lose his business but keep his freedom.
Lawyers drafting a consent agreement in advance of an emergency hearing this afternoon. 7 on Your Side's Jason Peterson is here to explain what the deal means to everyone involved. Jason.
Well, Scott, for Leroy Wood, it means his business, Arkansas Funeral Care, is out of business. For many of his recent customers, though, it's a disappointing result following some disturbing revelations. David Parchman was 48 years old when he suffered a heart attack in his sleep and died. Arkansas Funeral Care handled his funeral. His parents say a poor embalming job necessitated a closed casket service.
It was horrible. We would like to see a much stiffer penalty.
Billy and Patricia Parchman were among those who addressed members of the State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors during a public comment period.
There's no penalty, even a $10,000 that was placed on them that will take care of the heartache and the pain and the suffering that the families have inflicted just because of lack of supervision and management and taking care of business in its proper manner.
In exchange for agreeing to surrender his funeral license and the funeral and crematory license of his business, the board agreed not to forward any information to the prosecuting attorney.
I think it should have been sent to the prosecuting attorney. It's exactly where I think it should have went. He was not... he'll have to deal with this on the other side wherever he goes.
Now, refunds to current customers are also part of this deal, and this agreement will not prevent or have any bearing on future complaints.
Some finality to this story tonight. Thanks, Jason. And if you hold a prepaid funeral policy with Arkansas Funeral Care and you're wondering what to do, Jason is going to add all he has learned about that to this story at KATV.com. Well, the fallout following the shutdown of a Jacksonville funeral home continues tonight. The first lawsuit has been filed against owner Leroy Wood and Arkansas Funeral Care. 7 on your side's Jason Peterson is here with details about that lawsuit. Do we know how much money the family is seeking, Jason?
Well, Scott, if successful, the price 2 women will be paid for their alleged mental anguish and suffering will be up to a jury. Little Rock attorney Harold Cook filed suit against Arkansas Funeral Care on Monday on behalf of the mother and wife of Kenny Smith. Smith died on October 30th. The days following his death are detailed in the lawsuit.
It's pretty obvious from the deterioration that occurred over a 2 to 4 day period of time that there was absolutely no refrigeration or embalming that had taken place during that period of time.
Page 4 of the 28-page lawsuit describes how the family alleges a funeral home employee advised that the casket not be opened. He looks like a monster, and he is completely green. If you view the body, you will have nightmares. Mrs. Smith went against that advice and details that upon opening her husband's casket, she was overwhelmed by the revolting and obnoxious odor, deteriorated flesh falling off his face and hands, bodily fluids excreting from his orifices, and clothing and the lining of the casket saturated with embalming fluid. A prepared statement from the family acknowledges that they are not alone in their grief.
We know that a number of families will unfortunately be reliving their own horrifying events, similar to those that we experienced in November of 2014.
Now, Cook says while his firm has been contacted by other families, so far he has filed suit only on behalf of Kenny Smith's family. We shared news of the suit with Leroy Wood's attorneys, but have so far received no word back from them.
All right, Jason, we know you've been on top of this story since the beginning. Keep us posted.
Well, sometimes when you watch a news story unfold, 2 questions come to mind. They certainly do for us sometimes. How could that happen? And what could be done to prevent it from happening in the future?
That was certainly true when a funeral home in Jacksonville was shut down last month. And tonight, 7 on your side's Jason Peterson joins us with a closer look at that situation. Jason?
All right. In the past, a state inspector has tried to visit every funeral home in the state once a year. The goal now is for each home to be visited twice a year. After the events of the past month, maybe it should be more than a goal. Maybe there ought to be a law. A cooler filled to capacity, unembalmed bodies being stored at room temperature, 31 bodies removed by order of the state. How is it that conditions inside a funeral home could get this bad? Many of you wondered the same thing. Brooks Parks asked on Facebook, are funeral homes regularly inspected? Marvin Wendell answered, when I was in the profession, we saw the inspector once a year. Dodge Angie added, you would think they would inspect more than once a year, and it would make sense to have more than one inspector. There are 356 full-service funeral homes in Arkansas. There are also 28 crematories, 14 transport firms, and 7 businesses that offer mortuary services only. 405 businesses statewide to inspect, and 1 inspector to do it. We were contacted by a man who says he spent 2012 and part of 2013 working at Arkansas Funeral Care. He's not proud of his time there and asked that we keep him anonymous. In the time you were there, how many times did a state inspector come by to take a look around and see how things were going?
To my knowledge, they didn't come by at all.
Not one time in over a year?
No.
In August of 2013, Daryl Ezell, the owner of Clinton Funeral Service, visited Arkansas Funeral Care to pick up a body. He described what he saw as something from a cheap horror movie and filed a complaint last month in hopes of showing the problems at the facility were nothing new.
I think that another inspector would help out greatly. It would eliminate, hopefully, the problem that occurred with Arkansas Funeral Care, although I feel comfortable saying that 99.9% of the funeral homes do not operate like that.
It's not a law, but the goal is to have our single state inspector visit all 405 statewide businesses twice a year. In her first year, she's on track to do that. It's been done that way in Louisiana with success for years. Mississippi, on the other hand, has 3 inspectors who need only visit each facility once every 2 years. Missouri has 5 inspectors, Texas has 2, and Oklahoma has 1 full-time and 1 part-time inspector. Arkansas Funeral Care passed inspection on July 3rd of last year. Results of inspections prior to that could not be reviewed because the records can't be located. What in your mind could prevent this situation from happening again?
I believe more oversight from the state, coming in and inspecting.
Another inspector would probably, it would take some of the load off the one that we do have. And
then they could visit more funeral homes more often.
Now, the man who had served as state funeral inspector for 22 years retired last summer. He only had to visit each facility once a year. I asked him today if he thinks one person can do semi-annual inspections. He answered yes, but says it will be challenging. If you have an idea that you think ought to be a law, send us an email to sos@katv.com. We'll examine another one of your ideas next Tuesday night.